Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Perrin. I am the CEO at Court Square Group. We are a managed service firm. We manage infrastructure for life science companies. We have an audit-ready compliant cloud environment, and we host a content management system called RegDocs 365 that deals with all sorts of clinical and regulatory content. I want to introduce our speakers today. I will be one of the speakers, as will Ronak Jain, who's going to also introduce himself and give you some background. He's with our partner company, Adlib, and we're working on these projects together. So I'll let Ronak introduce himself. Ronak?
Hi all. I'm the principal ML engineer at Adlib who's trying to figure out how we can use document intelligence and NLP and all these different AI tools to make sure that all the processes that Keith would be talking about today can be automated, and we can use all the training tools related to NLP and document intelligence to ensure that all the practices are executed as he will explain. And we will go slightly deeper into the aspects about document intelligence as we deal with in these scenarios a little deeper in the coming slides. So excited.
Great. Thank you, Ronak. And just to let you know, we deal with a lot of life science clients, both at the sponsor level as well as CROs and consultants in the industry. So we get to see a lot of the problems that are out there. Working with a company like Adlib, we're able to identify some of the issues that our client base has, but at the same time, Adlib's working on the technical aspects of how to solve that. So bringing together both the subject matter expertise of our clients and ourselves with the subject matter expertise on the ML and the intelligent automation side helps to develop some pretty good solutions for this. So looking forward to a good webinar here, and hopefully you'll get some good information out of this. Let me kind of go over the agenda right now with you so you can understand what we're going to be talking about. So the agenda, as we're talking about today, is first, we're going to talk about current challenges within life science and really why we're using some of what we're doing. The overview of intelligent automation, I'm going to go into some of the technical details there. And when we talk about digging a little bit deeper into how some of that works, he'll jump into that. I can add a little color where we see it. And then how AI can save you time, money, and effort. What we did is we actually identified some projects we're working on today and some of the benefits that our client base is currently getting out of some of those solutions. So I think it's important to see that there are real world challenges that are being tackled today and can be incorporated into what you're doing to help you save time and money. So let's get into that first step of the current challenges within life science. So when we talk about current challenges, we're really talking about different areas along the different phases. We know that everything's becoming increasingly complex. When I talk about complexity within the clinical and regulatory space, we'll talk at a couple things. Clinical trial management. Over the last couple of years, particularly with the COVID pandemic, we've found that there was a big push toward decentralization of clinical trials, a lot of more remote access capabilities. The trials became more complex. The protocols became more complex. We had more hybrid protocols that were happening out there. There's a lot of staff shortages. People weren't in. People that were doing some of the work weren't as well trained as they might have been, or didn't have understanding of all the processes along the way. So a lot of that stuff added to the complexity of some of the trials. Not to mention the fact that as some of the recent shows that I've been going to, they talk a lot about people just getting out of the clinical research realm altogether, and which is just making it even tougher for the industry. When we talk about documentation processes, there's just an increasing volume of documentation coming out. The complexity of those documents and the size of those documents make dealing with them very tough. When you're dealing with some of the Microsoft Word issues and some of the PDF issues along the way, it just becomes more like rocket science than anything. And then there's just so many manual processes. In some respects, I think that this industry is somewhat backward in the fact that a lot of times we actually add more manual processes just to check on ourselves, which actually exacerbates the problem of having to deal with all these extra documents on a very regular basis. When I'm talking about the regulatory submission aspect of things, and we try to get into looking at regulatory submissions, there's always increasing requirements. We're dealing with multiple agencies and multiple submissions. A lot of times you may have a single product that is going to go to multiple therapeutic areas, or it's going to have multiple countries that you're dealing with. At the same time, now you're exponentially adding in complexity around all of the different regulatory authorities, what they want from a commitments perspective, how you can respond back to that. There's new issues coming out like IDMP over in Europe. Some of the things that we're dealing with on the ECT side, the TMF side with the trial master file or the common technical document spec, those things all in themselves can be just so overwhelming to the majority of people that if we can have tools that can help to automate that process, it's certainly worth trying to put those in place and working with those. This is where intelligent automation and AI, machine learning, all those kind of things can help. When I talk about manual documentation, delays and pitfalls, we talk about different areas all the way from early drug discovery where it's before preclinical areas, then we get into preclinical, talking about clinical, regulatory, post-launch. Each one of those areas has their own issues, and that's part of the problem. We deal a lot with integration between multiple applications, between transferring data back and forth between different areas. So the whole concept of data capture and document creation, is there a way that we can actually look at creating documents from some of the data that's already out there? Can we have a common vernacular around different documents that we're trying to create? Can we put those things together? That's a big part of where we're looking at automation in the future and how it can potentially do some stuff. And I'll cover that with some working groups that I'm working on with some industry groups right now to deal with that. Document classification and filing within a different folder framework or file framework. Typically, we're going to talk about the TMF when we're talking about that, or the ECTD backbone when we're putting together a submission system using the EDM reference model. Those of you familiar with the DIA, Drug Information Association, you'll see that they've got a couple reference models that they've developed out there. One is the DIA EDM reference model. The other is the eTMF reference model. The EDM reference model is all about the ECTD and how you lay out the common technical document layout for linking documents together so that a reviewer can look at those when you submit data. The TMF is when you're doing the clinical trial, and the clinical operations folks are gathering data from the different clinical sites, from the trial, putting things together, and then classifying them based on that. We'll actually go through a real example of that later on as we talk about that and how automation can actually help with that. I'm also actually working on a RIM reference model. So when you talk about the regulatory side of things, RIM is regulatory information management. So the concept of actually automating some of your RIM processes is also something that we're working on as an industry group out there. Key data extraction and metadata tagging. You know, one of the big problems that people have is they don't really understand some of these reference models or how to classify things. So if you have tools that use basic understanding of how things get classified based on subject matter experts, you can actually generate that. That's where Ronak's team comes in, and they understand how to identify machine learning, how they can teach these models how to look at the data and what will go and where. We can actually put techniques together that when you drag and drop files into different areas, we can automatically metadata tag that. You can use the content out of documents to do that. We'll talk about that for some practical examples later on. In the submission publishing realm, the concept of being able to reuse documents for different countries or different health authorities is going to be important. Being able to actually generate some of those, maintaining the links between documents. There's lots of things that feed into some of the submission systems and some of the validation tools that are out there for validating the data that goes into the regulatory authorities. Those are all important aspects, and we can automate some of those capabilities. And then when you act post-launch, multi-language translation and post-launch marketing, making sure that some of the structured product labeling characteristics are maintained, using some of those aspects. I was with a company just the other day talking about their structured product label, SPL. Some of you may be familiar with and how that works. There's a lot of effort going into language translation and that work. There's some great companies out there doing some work there. And then trying to keep the marketing data in line with the actual changes to anything that happens. So our goal there is to automate some of that process as much as possible. Delays can be very costly. This is one thing that we've talked about quite a bit in this industry, is how do we stop the delays? Because every time we delay a drug coming to market, that eats into the patent lifetime for those drugs. 85% of clinical trials do not finish on time, and that's just a horrible statistic, but most of that is based on patient populations and trying to get patients for the studies. The second biggest reason for those delays are not patient populations as much as they are inefficient processes handling all the documents and the data as part of those trials. So that's where we can come in and we can try to help drive that. I can't help you with the patient stuff, although there are some great companies helping to find better patients. And there are some AI techniques actually identifying patients out there that in the future will come in. We're not working on those right now, but I do know there's some great companies that are working on that. 94% of delays last more than a month, and realistically, it could be 3 months to 6 months to a year. You know, many of these trials go long, and the pandemic really exacerbated that with some of these trials going much longer. And we're talking anywhere from $600,000 to $8 million in costs of delays for these costs. If it's a blockbuster drug that's going to be a billion, multi-billion-dollar drug, it's just going to delay every day you don't have it and it's delayed. That's revenue that's not coming in the door. So these are definitely something that these companies want to be able to deal with on a very regular basis. So now let's kind of get into the overview of intelligent automation. We're going to give you a background right now of some of the techniques so that you can understand how it can actually affect what you do with your documents and with your content. Ronak, if you want to kind of jump in here.
Yeah. So as Keith has been explaining different scenarios of how we can use intelligence coming out of documents and drive automation to reduce costs, there are several aspects about looking into documents and extracting and surfacing the right information that knowledge experts can then use in their downstream tasks that we focus on. And the three core things that we have come up with at Adlib are basically layout analysis of the whole document and identifying where important information could lie. For example, where could the title of the document lie? Where could the image using which a decision can be made later lies? That's a part of the whole ecosystem, which we call layout analysis. And using all of that layout information, we overlay it with OCR and NLP technologies to actually extract key information that might exist in the document, both in terms of the key might be mentioned inside the document, or you might have a custom domain-specific key that you want to extract from inside a document, right? So after layout, a lot of key information extraction and manual tagging happens so that you can extract and surface those key information points. For example, in a form, you already have the key mentioned for which a value is entered within the form. But if it's not a form, then it might be something like a big text where your key information sits within the text. How do you extract that? And how do you train for it? And how do you build an ML model which can surface that information in different scenarios? Once you have these two, extracting and surfacing the right kind of information, we feed it into classification and categorizing algorithms where a lot of these informations combined with knowledge experts' feedback can do a lot of these tasks for you related to classification and categorization. And at the core of it, of course, everything is driven by machine learning. When we say artificial intelligence, we're talking a lot also about object detection through computer vision, but then there's also OCR and NLP technologies related to search and question answering that we use throughout this whole pipeline. Yeah.
Thank you, Ronak. A couple key points I think that you made. One thing that I think people have to understand is, it's almost fairly easy, and there's been a lot of tools out there to deal with forms and dealing with structured content. A lot of times it's the unstructured content that give us the most problems and give us the most fits, and we have to deal with that. You mentioned a couple of key technologies. I know that in our world, the concept of OCR and the fact that Adlib has a great OCR engine, most people don't realize that a lot of times when you're getting data in from a site or all over the place, people will scan that information in, and all of a sudden it's not searchable anymore because it's an image file. Well, by using OCR, you can actually make it searchable again. We'll do that automatically on some of the documents that we get coming in specifically for that. And a lot of times the solution that you're talking about requires many of these techniques or multiple techniques together to come up with that solution. We'll actually talk about that in the 1572 process, and then we do. There's a big area we can talk about multiple areas and how that affects each other. So let me pop on to the next slide here.
Yeah. You'll see some examples now, not specifically from life sciences, but overall from this document processing and information extraction domain, where we are trying to make sense of documents. So just giving some examples where you see this document here and you try to figure out, okay, where does the title sit? So the layout of the document tells you where is the title, right? The language might not tell you. So that's step one, figuring out based on the layout where to look for the right kind of information. If you go to the next slide. So with that layout analysis, you then go to the next task of identifying the key information points. So where are the key value pairs? What values are there in the tables? What are the columns? What are the significant columns and rows that you want to surface to enable decision making in the downstream processes? So these two techniques are heavily used in our information extraction pipelines to drive things like classifications. For example, in the next slide, you'll see one of the values that was extracted based on the domain. We could classify it as a seller, right? So for example, if you see gravity PDF, it's only in this domain, in this context, that it becomes a seller. So you need to take manual feedback from someone who knows what annotation to give to this document, but it also depends on a lot of information extraction pipelines before, which tells you this is an important information to look at, and then annotate it with a domain-specific tag called seller. So these are the overall techniques that we use to actually extract and surface information so that you can use it in downstream processes that Keith might go deeper into.
Great. Oops, went backwards there. Sorry, folks. So now when we talk about intelligent automation in document processing, a lot of what Ronak just talked about with the layout analysis, the extraction, the metadata tagging, the classification, we're dealing with all those documents coming in, whether they're PDF documents, whether they're going to be Microsoft Word documents, Google documents, whatever they come in. We want to be able to use that in intelligent document processing against them, and then be able to store them in a qualified and validated repository. In our case, we have RegDocs 365. It could be Viva, it could be Documentum, could be a whole bunch of different areas that you store your documents. But the concept of can we use these different automation techniques to be able to deal with those documents, ingest them, and do something with them, and how do we work with that? It could also be just pulling them off of the internet and doing something with things that are actually out there. There are actually companies right now that are dealing with publicly available data and using AI techniques on them. At this point in the webinar, we're actually going to talk about see if we can do a quick poll. And what we don't want to do is we want to ask on a scale of 1 to 3, how has the volume of documents increased over the last 2 years? You know, we're thinking that we'd like to find out from you what is. So if you would mind just clicking on the document volumes and letting us know that. We'll let this go for about a minute or so till we get the information in, and then we'll put that out there. All right, so we see that we have some increase. Some people have no change. Well, that's pretty good for them anyway. Maybe that may be very bad. But if there's a high increase and it's not manageable, that's certainly one that I think that that automation will help out with. I know that people hate dealing with lots of new documents, so it's a good thing for us to do. So let's move on to the next slide. So when we start talking about AI and intelligent automation and NLP and OCR, part of that is envisioning what it is that you're going to be able to use. One of the issues that we have is sometimes it's very difficult for people just to envision what the answer is going to be. I actually work in a field where there are tensions sometimes about adding too much technology in different areas. And I think that's what we saw. The pandemic actually helped with the virtual clinical trials and with distributed clinical trials. One of the nice things is that there are lots of different industry groups, and DIA that I mentioned earlier, Drug Information Association, has a great working group. There's a RIM working group right now that's developing the new RIM reference model. A couple different subgroups off of that, and one of those is an AI working group, and we've actually renamed ourselves Intelligent Automation. And we sat down together, and this is not just vendors, but a lot of the sponsors that are out there that have these actual problems. And we sit down and we kind of go over this stuff and work together to one, educate the rest of the field, but also put together white papers so that people can learn on what other people are doing in the industry and how it's being tackled out in the world. So if I can go through a couple of those things, we sat down and we looked at a couple key areas. One of those key areas was regulatory and submission strategy. How do we use regulatory data that's already out there? There's actually a company out there that is using publicly available regulatory data, and they're able to put together a database of queryable events that you can look at as a regulatory specialist to be able to find out how different countries looked at different drugs, how long it took to do things with those, a lot of different capabilities. They actually was a presentation to our working group. It was great. One of the issues that we found out though with it is it was only dealing with drugs that had been approved. So the problem is that there's lots of things that didn't get approved. Let's say you're a big pharma and you have lots of data. Can we take those same techniques and put them against all of your drugs or all of your products that are out there, both the approved and the non-approved, and find out different capabilities around that? I think that's a great place to look at that. And that's really for your strategy and how you know, which countries we want to go after first, or do I want to take an approved drug here and try to go over here? Where is it faster to get approval? Those are some of the things that they're looking at. That also kind of blends itself into the whole concept of planning and tracking. And when you're looking at the regulatory processes, so you want to look at the length of the approval process and costs by country. If I can do that and understand that, maybe that would, you know, inform our decision as to where to go next and how we want to do that. Do we have an action plan around portfolio optimization and submission strategy? Can those kind of things feed together? Do I have a KPI dashboard, KPIs, key process indicators, a dashboard of, you know, predictive kind of analytics around different things that we would identify? And can AI or machine learning help us to look at some of that? Again, that's looking either at your own data or looking at publicly available data that may be out there. We as a group are looking at that and saying, hey, these are things that we think would be valuable out there. We actually even prioritize some of those, and we tried to put together some high priority things where we're working on a potential hackathon. I was just on an email thread this morning talking about doing a hackathon, and if we were to do a hackathon, where would we focus our effort? I suggested content development because that seemed to be the largest area where we were looking at how AI could, or intelligent automation could help out. Some of the things there we were talking about with framework, identifying required content, structure, and context. How can we put together something like the TMF framework or ECDD or CMC? Each of the different areas within the different modules have their own reference model, or can we use those? So how do we generate that content from that? Can we generate auto-create documents, extract actionable data, whether it's coming from IDMP? Now, it's a big thing out in Europe now, trying to do IDMP. Can we auto-generate, you know, portions of clinical study reports? Can we turn safety data into adverse event reports? Are there things like that we can automate? All of these things would actually save time and money because we have limited resources that are available to do this. And you really do need the subject matter expertise to be able to handle some of that functionality. So by being able to put tools in people's hands, we can actually use their time more wisely. When I look at processing of documents, auto classification, multi-language translation, file conversions, can we take documents and automatically do those things with them? We know that people do that day in and day out. They manually take a Word document and zip it through a PDF converter and add the links that they need to do. Can I automatically do that somehow? Is there a way that I can train the system to do some of that? Can we do auto filing within the TMF? Can we do multi-format publishing? Can we convert scientific language to marketing labels? I know I saw one of the big pharma companies put a thing out that was talking about the label. And how can I take a structured product label that's in very scientific language and make that more consumer friendly? How do we do some of that stuff and then keep it pertinent so that if things change, it can change with it so that people will automatically get that. So those are all areas where AI and machine learning can actually help. Data management. How do we store data for omni-channel processing? Is there a way that we can actually use that data in multiple formats? And reporting. How do we track document inventories and expiration dates on documents, whether it's financial disclosure forms or CVs or different things like that? We're going to talk a little bit about that in some of the 1572 processing that we're actually doing right now with some of our clients. Publishing and submissions, handing off. In publishing and submissions, handing off auto assembly to affiliates or distributor document packages. Some companies, if you're dealing with multiple countries, you're going to have distributors or affiliates out there. Can you work with them effectively enough and be more efficient with that? Submission, the auto publishing of the submission-based documents. If I'm dealing with multiple regulatory authorities, if you know that they have different requirements for each one, can I automate that process by understanding how to change those things between them? And maybe there's different language capabilities that we can incorporate as part of that. And then Q&A and correspondence management. And when we get questions from the regulatory authorities and they want answers, they want commitments of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, can we automate that? Can we somehow take those correspondence and do something with that? Can we track it in a RIM system? RIM is Regulatory Information Management. Can I do that and make that work? All of these kind of things are things that we talk about as an industry because we want to know that people are seeing that we're doing that and we can help them to kind of identify different things that are doing it. As we publish these white papers, as we publish these different reference models, our goal is to get people thinking differently. One of the big things that I think about right now is that AI is used so much more in the consumer market right now. They know more about what you want to eat or what you want to buy at the retail store than we do about what the drugs you take or what you need to take based on your health. So the goal there is to kind of do that. Next is M&A. How do I take the concept of in-licensing or out-licensing and auto ID documents that are going to be going into my systems? If I've got legacy systems and I'm pulling something in from somebody else, can I use that data effectively enough to make intelligent decisions as to where that should go within our legacy systems? So one of the other issues that we're dealing with right now is a problem where you may buy a drug product from somebody, and one of the issues you have is you may not know what you don't have until you're going through those documents. If I'm buying a bolus of documents and I've got hundreds of documents or thousands of documents, it's going to take somebody manually going through those documents, and it may be 3 months, 6 months down the road, and all of a sudden they find a reference to a document that you don't have. Well, now when you go back to that sponsor to get that document, they've already archived stuff. It's back in their legacy system. It takes weeks to get somebody onto it, to find that document, to pull it back out, to get it for you. How do we identify that stuff right out of the gate? We're working on an AI initiative to actually identify all the documents that you've pulled, and at the same time, look at all the references within those documents so we can identify how to ask for the documents that you're missing right out of the gate, so that when you're buying that compound, you don't have to worry about that. So that's a big part of where AI can help out. Now let's go into some real world areas and talk about some of the benefits and how they work. Give me 1 second. Thank you. So now we're going to talk about how AI can help you save time, effort, or money across the board. And I'll go into that. If there are any questions, I failed to mention this early on, please just put them in the chat window and we'll surface those at the end toward a Q&A session. Or if you have something that you want to ask right away, just let our people know and they'll interrupt me and we can kind of jump on those. So if I look at the benefits of automation, we want to be able to look at up to 75% increase in clinical operation efficiency. If it takes our ClinOps people that much extra time to classify documents or to rip documents apart and put things in, can we save that much time across the board? If you're really doing this right and you're putting things in, can we save half the time in the regulatory submissions preparation phase? Realistically, if we can get some of these efficiencies built in, we can get our drug to market up to a year ahead of time, based on some of the timings that we've seen in the industry and how long it takes to do this work. If we start to eliminate all the different manual efforts that are there, if you actually first identify all your manual efforts, because everybody's a little bit different. Some of you guys do things differently than others, and by identifying where your steps are and pulling those out, we can actually kind of get to market that much faster with the drug, depending on where we are within that process. Let's talk about some real world examples that can actually illustrate how you can get some of that kind of savings, because the reality is that savings is what you're really trying to get when you're out there. How am I going to get that? Well, let's look at one classic. And we have 3 different use cases right now that I'm going to go over for you. And I've got a couple more in my head that I can talk about as we go through to kind of generate in your mind some thoughts about how you could do things. We have a project that was taking 30 man days worth of effort for somebody to go through and generate a 1572 summary report. That 30 man day effort now is a 2-hour review session to review the documents that are there. So that's effectively a 10,000% efficiency boost. Now, realistically, most of your projects are never going to see that kind of efficiency boost. I was very happy to see that we were able to do something like that. It now allows them to run this process a lot more frequently. They can look at things, do things in interim, but it's a great thing. When I talk about 1572, some of you may recognize this document. This is a 1572 document. There's a couple key points that we can make here. When we talk about structured and non-structured data, when you look at this document, it looks like it's very structured. And you've got things like the name. Is this name valid? Yes. When we look at some of the check boxes, do we have the CVs on file? Do we route this for manual review? What do we need to do? All those kind of things as part of that. There's lots of tools out there that can actually pull data off of this. And in doing some of these projects, we found a lot of these tools, and it was fairly easy to use some of that. However, when you look at the same form, what looks like it is structured, this area that calls for name of sub-investigators, so sub-Is, basically, you could put the documents, you could put the names of the sub-Is in here in a bunch of different ways. And it all depends on who's putting them in. Well, if I look at this and I say, John Jones is in here, Mary Murray and Mike Simpleton, here's 3 different ways of doing it. And because it's basically a box on this form, depending on the administrative assistant or the doctor or whoever that actually put this information in, all of a sudden it can be in multiple ways. So you need natural language processing to go in there and take a look at this. How do we ascertain what's the first name, what's the last name? Do I have a database that we're going in to find out are these actual PIs? You know, the FDA keeps a list of PIs that have been debarred from doing work. Can we assign that against that and look and see if these are actually effective PIs that can be in there? So, and if you notice, there's also a continuation page for item number 6. You could actually go to a continuation page. So now we have to program the concept of let's look and see and make sure we don't have continuation in here. So all of this concept, and if you think of this one form, if I have a clinical trial that goes on for multiple years, and I have, let's say, 100 to 150 sites, I may have multiple documents like this in each one of those sites. So every time I get one of these documents, it has to be filed and kept within my TMF. Well, in this case, for this person to go through and look at 150 sites with 5 to 10 documents per site, it was taking forever to go through this, validate all the different names, put them all together. By automating this process and pulling this all together, now instead of having to manually pull this data together, she was able to take all these documents, pull them together, and just generate a report, which she could then just eyeball, identify different things that looked out of whack, and put together her report in a very seamless fashion. We can extend this same concept if you think about it. The 1572 also has ties back to financial disclosure forms and CVs. So now in our TMF, to make sure that we validate our TMF or make sure that we have the right stuff in our TMF, we can actually tie this back to verifying that we have a CV that's there, or verifying that we have a financial disclosure form. And oh, by the way, all those types of things are time bound. So if my trial went multiple years, do I have a new financial disclosure form every 2 years or a new CV every 2 years? Is it the most reliable document that's out there? We can actually put alerting in there and identify documents that are beyond the time bound. So we can put timings in there. That's a real practical example of a way that you can actually use automated intelligent automation and AI and machine learning to actually solve a huge problem for you for what looks like a simple thing, but really isn't. And the more you learn, the more you teach it, the easier it becomes for it to do that. At this point, we're going to ask another poll question. Just because you've seen one example, and I've talked about a couple different use cases, on a scale of 1 to 3, what's the level of process and document automation implemented at your organization? Have you thought about it? Are you doing anything with it? Some of you may be all automated. So if you wouldn't mind, just kind of put in here where you are. Do you have all manual? Are you some automation or all automated? If you're all automated, I'm going to ask you why you're in this, other than just to listen to my voice talk or hear what Ronick has to say about AI. But realistically, we're glad you're here anyway. We'll give a few minutes for people to put the stuff in, and then we'll move on. Okay, so we've got some automation, so people are in there. We got a bunch that are a couple of people that are still fully manual. We've got some automation going on, and then we've got some all automated. That's fantastic if you've been able to do that. I'd be willing to bet that if you still looked, you probably find a bunch of manual things here and there that are out there. Although there are some pretty good applications out there that have a lot of automated capabilities, so I'm glad for you guys. Let's move on and talk about another use case that is a practical example that we're working on right now with Adlib. Basically, the concept was we want to reduce the amount of time it takes to deal with a document. Right now it was 5 to 8 minutes per document coming back from a clinical site into a CRO. We were able to get that down, or we're working on getting that down to less than a minute per document, saving up to 8 hours of manual work per week. What could you all do with an extra day's worth of a man-day's worth of effort from a CTA's time at your CRO? I think that a lot of people could do a lot with that. Our goal there would be 120% efficiency boost across the board to be able to reuse that person's time to do something more intelligent out there. And the reality is that the more that we incorporate machine learning techniques into this, the easier it gets to actually make it even faster to deal with. When I look at the concept here, when we look at the TMF, this is a screenshot from our RegDocs platform where if you look across the top there, you've got the different TMF zones, the sections, the components, all those kind of things. Somebody has to manually go in there and set the settings on those. If I could actually go through the documents and pull the content out of those documents and use that content, those key value pairs that Ronak was talking about earlier, and identify different things, whether it's the title of the document, it's the content within that document, and be able to identify those documents. We could place them and put them in the right place within the TMF and automatically set their, whether it could be the name of the documents, if we have a standard naming convention, it could be the TMF elements. And look here, I can see that we have all the different different TMF zones. These are all set manually when somebody puts things in. We've automated the application of this where people drag it in based on whether it could be site number or different things. We can tell which country it's from. There's lots of different ways that we can automate this process to do that. But that's where the machine learning techniques that come in, that's where some of the different ways that Ronak was talking about a little earlier help us to identify how to do that and how to put those things in place. Love to hear your thoughts on how you're doing it today and how it might be automated for you. Let's talk about another example. And one of those areas that I'm talking about is basically regulatory correspondence and commitment tracking. A lot of times you're going to see that what happens is if you've got multiple products in multiple countries, this problem is exacerbated dramatically because what happens is you may have a single person or multiple people that are getting in these correspondence from the regulatory agencies. They're grabbing them, they're taking the content of that, they're putting it into an Excel spreadsheet, identifying where it came from, what was in it, and who has to track what. So you've got all these different Excel spreadsheets going around. Somebody may leave, all of a sudden somebody inherits that spreadsheet. They have to deal with that. Internally to the company, they're taking that content and they're going to be manually creating those spreadsheets. They're going to then take that and then take those commitments and calendar events and put them on somebody's calendar or implement them into a RIM system if you have one, but they're going to do that by hand. And none of that's automated. Our goal would be to say, how do we take that? And quite honestly, a lot of times when we're migrating data from one party to another, we find that there's so many email that come in from different authorities that people just send us the whole email mailbox or the PST file, and we have to take that whole thing and then pull things out of it when we're dealing with that data. The reality is, imagine if you had an automated process that understood the headers coming in. You could take those correspondence, automatically PDF them, throw them into your RIM system, and then using NLP, identify the commitments that are in there and put those commitments as separate line items within your RIM system with alerts specifically for your people to use. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about automating some of this process. That's a way that most effectively can use some of these tools to do that. So when I look at that, I'm saying, how do I take 5 to 10 minutes of email processing and RIM data entry to less than a minute's worth of time, giving you hundreds of percentage of efficiency boost across the board. Not only that, it's going to help you improve your commitment timeline accuracy and tracking, because the real value there is that you're going to be able to take that data and you're going to be able to use that data, and you're going to be able to give real-time status. If somebody were to ask you, where are we in the process? What's going on with these things happening? You can automatically say it. You can generate reports out of the RIM system, even if you don't have a RIM system. Being able to generate that and create those Excel spreadsheets on the fly out of the real-time data from that is still an important use case for you. So again, these are just 3 practical examples of something that's happening today using AI, NLP, OCR, PDF rendering, automated rendering, all those capabilities to generate efficiencies across the board. I recently was talking to somebody at a major pharma, and they were talking about having to go out and look at all of the publishings about their drug product. And they had a staff of a number of people that would go out, and every month they would have to go out, find all the publications around one product, figure out, are they really talking about our product, or is it just a mention of our product? And if it is there something in that mention that talks about, off-label drug usage, or is something about the drug? Can you imagine if we were able to take AI and point that at that, grab that data and be able to generate some of that? Now, instead of a manual process, the people would be just reviewing what is generated by the output. They could actually look at more drug products on a more frequent basis, find things. There may even be a new revenue stream coming out of it, because if you have identified off-label usage, all of a sudden now there would be a new revenue stream for that. So we've gone about 40 minutes in, and I've talked quite a bit. I know you're probably tired of listening to me talk. We did have a few questions that came in during the session. So why don't we get to those questions? And here we are. Katerina, when you want to talk to us about some of the questions that are out there?
Sure. So we have one question. I think that could be for you, Keith. Question here is, can we overlay this automation solution over our existing PLM and RIM systems?
Sure. The concept is really around taking the automation that we have built in and understanding how we can pull the data out of where you have it, whether it's in our RegDoc system or not. We have it's a qualified system. We have a way of using it as a cloud-based, working with Adlib, that allows you to their system will actually read in these documents, process the documents, and spit it out. Part of it's going to be tied in with where we're trying to feed the data into whether it's your RIM system or your lifecycle management system, and how we can tie it in with that. But we certainly can do that. There's no reason we can't. It's first understanding where the data is coming from and where you want the output to go to. So that's something that we do on a very regular basis. A big part of our job is integration of multiple applications and using tools like this specifically to do some of that. So yeah, I think that we can certainly do that. And we've worked with Adlib pretty hard to be able to allow that to be a cloud-based solution that can tie directly into customer environments. We've got everything validated, qualified, so we understand the importance from a regulatory perspective to make sure that happens that way.
Okay, thank you, Keith. I think the next question is for Raunak. Regarding data extraction, how does the system identify and assign appropriate tags to key values? Is there a settings tab where we can train the system to recognize these values?
Yeah. So actually, we can do both. We can let the AI assign key values based on, suppose it's a form. It knows that it's the first name or the last name because the form says it in the title itself. But we do also give capabilities for you to assign your own ontologies for entities and give it specific annotations on the form or other document types, so that you can control what they're called when the system throws out these values. So yes, both are possible. You can let the AI figure it out on its own, or give it specific values based on your custom requirements. And all of that is trainable. All of that is a part of the whole key value extraction system. So yes, it is possible.
Thank you, Raunak. We have one more question. I think that's around AI. Can the system help make annotation and model building faster?
Right, actually it does. So we have a big module where we try to make sure that we're not annotating redundant stuff. So this field is called active learning. And what happens is that if the document processing and AI extraction algorithms have a high confidence on what they're seeing and what they're extracting. They don't make you annotate all of those data points again and again. It only brings out intelligently what it thinks can be confusing for the algorithms. And using all of those active learning techniques, we actually reduce the annotation effort orders of magnitude, maybe 10% of what you might originally annotate. So yes, we have a very well-developed active learning feedback loop to actually drive faster annotations.
Thank you, Raunak. Okay, we have one more question. So I think, Keith, it could be for you. Why has there been such a lag in implementing AI in the regulatory side of the business?
So I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier as part of the presentation when I talked about the fact that, particularly in the regulatory space, I think clinical now has really grasped a lot of this because they were forced to because of the pandemic and because of doing decentralized trials and having to grab data and remote monitoring and all the things that they had to do. So they were thrust into actually jumping on technology more and using more. I think in the regulatory space, what's happened is there's been this hesitation because they're dealing with the regulatory authorities, and it's everybody wants to double check everything and understand that. One of the big problems there is trying to figure out, how do I validate the data that's there? How do I get the learning sets? If I'm going to teach machine learning, how do I do that? And how do I do that across different data sets to do it? So I think we're trying to tackle those kind of problems. There's a number of companies out there now that are working on having better validation sets for the data to use to train the models and how those models can go out. And I think as we're seeing success in different areas within regulatory, it's starting to be grasped more. And I think when they start to see what can happen, particularly with people using tools to generate output from publicly available data, they can start to grasp how they could use that for their own data internally. And I think that helps to push them a little bit harder into using it more and more from within their own space. So I think those are areas that regulatory is still going to lag behind a little bit, because just like quality, where they always want to be able to be more careful than not, because realistically, you want to be able to, you don't want to do anything that's going to slow down your process of getting submitted and getting approval for that drug product. But the reality is, if I can save time and do more with intelligent automation to get us there faster, maybe there's other ways that we incorporate more of that automation as part of the process. So I just think it's a mindset issue, and I think it's around how we work with them to understand the best way to implement. And I think it's teams like the DIA working groups that we're working on right now, that working together can show the industry that there are ways to do it. Even the hackathon type stuff that we're doing now to show people, here's ways of doing things, here's how to set it up. Typically, it's the large pharma companies that are doing these projects internally. And the issue is really trying to get them to get those kind of projects out of the large pharma and into the smaller ones. A lot of times the smaller ones are dealing particularly with just trying to get to the market, get approval, get to the next level. Whereas the larger ones have the capability to say, all right, now we went beyond a few thousand documents. We've got hundreds of thousands of documents. I've got millions of documents. I need to scale this up. I'm beyond what we can do manually. They almost have to be, they're almost forced to use automation for some of that. And that's why they're able to grasp that, and they're able to pay for it because it's going to result in a huge savings for them in the end. And once you do that, then we can reuse that for other parties. So I think that's a big part of what we see and why regulatory is kind of lagged behind. But I think it will catch up as more and more tools are available for them. The other issue I think that is out there is that as these smaller companies are out there and starting to do some really nifty things or with different techniques, they may get bought up by maybe some of the big CROs or things like that. And all of a sudden that technology is sucked into a particular CRO or a different company, and then all of a sudden it's lost to the wider market unless you're going to be using that CRO to do your filings with them or whatever. So some of it is part of the industry in general and how the industry works. So I think there's a couple different avenues as to why that is, but the biggest thing is fear, and I think we're trying to overcome that by working with the different groups and getting people to talk about it some more. If you go to RSIDM, which is a thing, or you go to RAPS, you're going to see more and more of these kind of presentations coming out and talking about this stuff. And part of our goal right now, this webinar is part of that, talking about how we can actually add more capabilities and doing that. So I'm working heavily with Adlib right now to be able to put some of the things out there that make it easier for people to understand how we can do this in the regulatory space.
Thank you, Keith.
Great. Well, it seems like we've had quite a bit out there. If there are any other questions, we're here. Looking forward to answering them. It was a pleasure being able to do this presentation for you and share with you the information that we had around the automation, intelligent automation, the way we're doing things from Adlib. Anything else, Katerina, that you'd like me to cover while we've got a few minutes at the end here?
Well, there are no further questions from the audience. I think it's safe to close off. We're almost at time.
Yeah, one thing
So
I would
any
actually
closing
like to
remarks?
do, Katerina, is before we close out, is just encourage people out in the audience that if you are thinking about it, the DIA working groups that are out there, if you haven't joined DIA, please do so. Join the different groups that are out there, but we're always looking for volunteers. So if you're interested in this tool, in this area, our working group would love to have some of you on there, whether it's the RIM working group, it's the AI working group. I've been involved in a number of different working groups. We would love to have more people involved in that process. So I would encourage you, please reach out, join us. If you have any questions specifically about that, my email is right here. Send me an email and we can send you some links to some of the areas where you can see some of these white papers that we've published. Love to have your thoughts and your feedback on some of that as well.
Thank you, Keith. And thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you. I think with that, we can close out now. Thank you,
Yes.
Katerina.
Thanks, everyone. This webinar will be shared with everybody who attended in the recording.
Thank you. Take care.